Welcome to the Empower Network webinar with Lakeesha Scott, talking about job interviews when you need disability accommodations. Before we get started, just a few accessibility notes. First, closed captioning and a transcript of the presentation are available if needed. The slides are linked in the Discord channel for Empower Network members, and please let us know if you have any accessibility challenges. We will do our best to accommodate them in future webinars. And a little disclaimer, the views and opinions expressed in this webinar are those of the speaker only and do not necessarily reflect the official position or policy of the Empower Network. Speakers participate in their own individual capacity as representatives of their own businesses or organizations. We are incredibly grateful for the generous donation of their time and expertise to support our organization and our members. This webinar is sponsored by Verizon Digital Ready, a platform designed to support small business owners to learn critical business skills at their own pace. Participants in the platform have opportunities to apply for grants throughout the year. The most recent $10,000 grant period closed in July. Please use the QR code on your screen today to sign up and start learning. And lastly, the content of this webinar is for informational purposes only. Please reach out to the appropriate licensed professionals in your area if you need professional assistance.
Hello, everyone. I go by Keisha. It's formally, when you see me on different social platforms, it's Lakeesha. That's my government name. But I'm very excited. I want to just take a quick second to say thank you to Jordan Joyce. She is the one who introduced me to the Empower Network. And so I'm grateful for that introduction. And I am grateful for the opportunity to share because I'm passionate about helping people. And that's what sparked my interest in even starting Great People Resources, is because I had 30 years in corporate, and no slam against corporate. It takes care of us from a monetary standpoint and it builds our skill set. But I really feel like I've been very much more empowered myself to help individuals who are out there seeking help when it comes to careers, when it comes to just making good life choices as to if a career in corporate or in entrepreneurship is most important. And so the introduction through Jordan Joyce, thank you. I have been so inspired by Stephanie and the entire board. They've welcomed me, and I really needed this community of support. So I'm grateful to share my knowledge and the experiences and the skill sets that I have been able to acquire over my career. I've just been very blessed to have a lot of different paths to take. And so through this presentation and workshop, I really want you to know that it is me speaking out of my experiences. It's me speaking through people that I've met along this journey. And it's also my experience of being able to go out and gather research as it pertains to people and choices that they're making. So without further ado, I will jump right in. But again, I just want to just say thank you to Stephanie and the entire board and to the Empower Network, because you guys have helped give me hope so that I can have a family of other people who have disabilities, as it pertains to how you navigate through this and needing support along your journey, even if wherever life may take you on the journey. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint and go through slides, and it will be a lot of content, but I do want to make sure that I stop throughout. If you have questions, make sure you put it in the chat. And there are some references and resources of where I've gathered some of this content at the very end, but I do want to spend time answering your questions throughout the workshop as well. So let's get started. So as you're navigating as a job seeker and you're wanting an accommodation from an employer, there will be a number of things that you will want to make sure. And so this framework of content will help you as you go through the application process, but then also preparing for the interview. We'll also cover quite a bit of questions as far as what are some of the required or maybe ideal questions and things of that. But let's work through this. This workshop is really going to be more focused on US based Americans with Disabilities Act, but I did add and some information regarding UK. So from the Equity and Equality Act. So I just want to make sure that you guys know if you're within the UK, there is some reference material in here. So again, like I mentioned to you before, everything that I focus on right now is really trying to ensure I'm empowering job seekers, folks that are out there within the job market, especially those with disabilities, focused on being able to navigate through the job application process, the interview process, and then also knowing your rights within those particular Americans with Disabilities Act, looking at different strategies and then being able to have questions so that you can address any concerns as they arise as you navigate through your candidacy. Okay, as you approach the job application, what's most important is that you research employers. And the reason I state that is because you want to work with employers that are disability inclusive. Okay. You want an employer to really value you and what your total skill sets are, but they have a strong emphasis when it comes to inclusion and diversity, because that's going to definitely impact your job application process, preparing for the job interview if you have a need to request for accommodations, and then also when you actually onboard and you're working within the work schemes, the workplace, working on projects within the different organization, as well as them being inclusive as far as accessibility in and out of the facility. So let's talk through the job description. As you start to look through the job boards and looking at the job descriptions, look for the essential as well as the non essential functions. You know what you're capable of doing based on your work skill, but then you also have to consider the physical requirements of that role as well. Okay. So make sure you understand all of those complexities to ensure that you're going to be set up from a successful standpoint to apply and be able to perform that job. The disclosure of a disability is truly optional. So don't feel as if you have to disclose that you have a disability. It is not necessary unless you are looking to receive an accommodation or request an accommodation from that employer. And then last here, when you approach the job application process, prepare your materials. Focus and highlight your skills, your experiences, and your achievements. Make it more about that and less about the disability. The next phase here is in regard to the interview preparation as well as how you prepare for that experience. So before the interview, you want to have the right to request a reasonable accommodation in advance. And that is verbally or in writing. It's whatever suits you and is very suitable. Again, we talked about optional. You do not have to disclose your disability unless you're needing an accommodation. So make it more about why you need the accommodation in verbally or in writing, specific to the job essential functions, not more about your medical condition or what type of health benefits are part of that particular employer. Frame your accommodations and make sure that you're maximizing your effectiveness when you're looking and requesting. What are some examples of accommodations that you would want to be able to provide to that employer? Is maybe they have pre-employment assessments. Request those in writing in advance of the interview and make sure you give ample time to requesting those assessments from that recruitment or that HR team member or the hiring manager. The other thing that you could ask for in writing or verbally is a sign language interpretation. Okay. So, what you want to do is make sure that you're asking for that information in advance so that it's suitable for you to be able to be very confident and have a very great experience when it comes to the interview. And if you need that in advance, that is not unreasonable. So the employer would definitely want to prepare that and get that to you in advance of your interview. And so here's just some sample language. I have a medical condition that requires an accommodation during the interview. May I have the questions in advance? That is a simple request, again, verbally, or you can do it in writing. And then for the interview, if you need wheelchair accessibility to the building, request that as well in advance so that those particular accommodations can be met for you. During the interview, focus more on emphasizing your qualifications, your experiences, and your problem solving skills. Why is that important? You're seeking a job, you have the essential skills, so focus heavily on that versus, again, the disability and the accommodation that you're requesting. And an employer definitely wants to ensure that they can meet your accommodations as long as it's in verbal writing or it's sent in writing in advance. So that's not unreasonable, but the reason you want to make sure that you're focusing on your qualifications, your experiences, and your skill sets is because you want to set yourself up as a qualified candidate that can perform all essential functions of the job. You're just needing an accommodation to navigate through the process. Responding to those questions and providing that information in advance is important. And it's how you ask that employer, which is important. If, in fact, there is a response to a question from that employer regarding your accommodation that you feel has come off as more negative and honing in on questions regarding your disability, make sure that you document that experience, okay? Because an employer should not ask about your disability, meaning what type of disability you have or any details pertaining to the disability. So, what I would want to make sure that you understand is that you can redirect that conversation and specifically talk about your skill sets and your qualifications and just specifically hone in on these are the only things that I'm needing to be able to accommodate my job application process, my interview, and if that's virtual or on site, whatever that request would be, make sure that it's verbal, make sure that it's precise to what you're needing that employer to be able to respond back to you. Okay. After the interview, these are all formal things. Always send a thank you note, but reiterate your interest and how valuable you are as a candidate, and then also restate your qualifications so that it puts you in a more positive standpoint with that employer and with that hiring manager. And again, I mentioned document your experience, keep notes of your interactions, both positive and things that maybe concerned you, okay? And then also make sure that if you requested an accommodation, that you've specified that verbally or in writing and make sure you document that information as well. The other thing that is important is understanding your rights. So let's talk a little bit about the Americans with Disabilities Acts, the act itself and the policy, and then also how it protects you as a candidate that is applying for employment. So the ADA prohibits discrimination. So employers cannot refuse to hire or single you out as a candidate solely based on your reasonable accommodation. Any information about your disability or your accommodation must remain confidential within the organization. So it should not be disclosed to other individuals. Um, and it should only be focused on the accommodation that you've requested. It should not be about individually about your disability. Okay. And then the other part is employers and candidates are expected to collaborate to make sure that it's effective and that if there's a reasonable accommodation that can be met and it's not outside of the space of being a huge expense or a burden on the organization, then the employer should be able to accommodate you for that particular ADA request. Okay, so I wanted to just reiterate, this is the US based American with Disability Act and the protections. That's what I just covered with you. So I wanted to make sure I had a specific screen if you wanted to take pictures of this, but I do know that the PowerPoint will be shared later. So again, ADA prohibits discrimination and it protects you as a job seeker, job applicant, or a candidate for a specific position that you're applying for. Okay, specific to the UK, there is the Equality Act. And so all UK employers are legally required to make reasonable adjustments for disabled applicants as well as for employees. So I wanted to make sure I stated some specific information here. It's pertaining to you as an applicant, so as a candidate, and then also from a onboarding standpoint with regard to the recruitment stage and throughout employment. So again, if you need time, extra time for assessments, for tests, for formats of the application to be sent in a different language, or if you need a specific language interpreter, then of course request that information well in advance and then allow the employer to provide that information. Some specific information is in here with regard to as an person that now has been hired on. There are additional things that you could require that employer to provide, which would be flexibility with working hours, and then also adapting to different equipment that's necessary within that environment and workplace. So again, in advance, in writing, and again, the focus is employers can provide you an accommodation. It just has to be verbally provided as well as in writing. How to access accommodations and support. This is the UK specific. So there are job centers that will provide disability advisors. So again, providing assistance and support is necessary. So don't feel as if you cannot request information. Employers have policies, they have workplace accommodations that can be provided. This information gives you a guide, it gives you key points to think about. The most important is making sure that communication takes place verbally or in writing, and then allowing that employer to make those reasonable adjustments so that it can be a better positive experience for you. And the focus is not to disqualify you, but to see what accommodations need to be made. And then if the focus really should be, and that's the key point, make sure that it's focused, you're focusing more on your skills, your experiences that are positive so that that employer can see your value as a candidate as well as an employee. So, what are some common myths and realities? So, let's talk through this. Here's one question. Will asking for an accommodation hurt my chances? So, this is specific to the US. The Americans with Disability Act prohibits discrimination for requesting accommodations. And most reputable employers, they follow this. So it's important, again, do your research. Make sure that that employer that you're seeking has a very inclusive and diverse work culture, and that will definitely help in your pursuit of a job with an employer so that they will value and have empathy for you as a candidate as well as you onboard as an employee. Second question here, do I have to disclose my disability? So, just reiterating this, disclosure is only required if you need an accommodation to apply or to interview. The third question, how do I know what to ask for? So, consider barriers you've experienced before and what has helped you succeed as a candidate and as a job seeker. So, rely focus on the Americans with Disability Act, as well as in the UK, the Equality Act, and then focus too to make sure you do more research regarding disability organizations because you can leverage some of those resources to help prepare you for the job application as well as for that job interview. And even when you get that job acceptance, make sure you rely on some of those examples and organizations as you transition into the workforce, right? Making sure that you're going to be able to have the resources and the support you need so that you'll be successful as a new employee joining an organization. And then, last question here, what if my request is denied? Employers must provide accommodations unless it causes undue hardship. If you're denied without an explanation, you can ask as a job seeker and as a candidate for clarification, or you can also contact the EEOC. Okay. And so it's important to know your rights, it's important to know policy, and it's also important for you to do your research with each employer that you are seeking a job. And you're wanting to make sure you have that knowledge so that you don't get those denials, because denials can start to decrease our confidence. And the more prepared you are, the better you are as a positive and valued candidate for that job that you're seeking. Here are some key takeaways and best practices for job seekers. So make sure, again, I mentioned be proactive, identify potential workplaces and employers that have opportunities for you to be more successful within that organization. Interview barriers in advance. Make sure you review everything that is pertaining to that job. Focus on the job essential functions and make sure that you're prepared and ready. And so, again, just to reiterate, submitting information in advance in writing and asking questions before the job interview will help you to reduce those levels of frustration or those levels of rejections that could possibly come. Know your rights. Make sure you familiarize yourself with the Americans with Disabilities Act and the protections that you have. And then also understanding what the responsibilities are of that employer. The best advocate for you is you. Advocate for yourself. Clearly request those accommodations and the level that you need. And whatever those requests are, make sure that you also reiterate how essential you are, how skilled you are, what your knowledge level is, so that you're playing on the same level of all candidates that are applying for that particular job. Assess the employer responses. The way the company handles your request can provide you insight to that work culture. And that is super important. For me, as an individual with a disability, I am always thoughtful as if I'm going to a new client environment. How do I navigate? Do they have a handicap accessible parking lot? Do I need to have any type of preparation to get into the building, right? Are there a lot of steps? I've got rheumatoid arthritis, so my joints hurt every day. So I have to prepare myself in advance to make sure that I have the strength and the energy to be able to walk distances as well, especially if the parking lot's further from where the building is, right? So those are things that you have to be able to do in advance to help you be more successful. Rejection is not always related to the accommodation. So again, make sure that you're asking for what you need in advance, and don't always think that the disqualifier is because of your disability. And so I want to go back to one thing that I mentioned prior, making sure that you have a positive mindset, you do your research, you make sure that you can focus on the employers and the job sites that are going to be more conducive, and then also more inclusive for those that have disabilities. Super important that you do that research. Let's jump into some questions. Okay, so these are appropriate and effective ADA related questions. So I just wanted to give a few here so that we can just kind of walk through them, because the question always comes, what should I ask and how should I ask? I don't want to present myself in a negative way or just focus on my disability. So here's some for you so that you feel more comfortable. So, when you're getting to that place and you're in that job interview or you're preparing for the job interview, here's one. What is your process for requesting workplace accommodations? Super important, right? It gives now the employer an opportunity to respond to how they actually support their workforce, but then also how do they support candidates who are applying for a workplace accommodation from an interview perspective. Another one is, if I need a reasonable accommodation at any point during my employment, who should I contact? That's always important as well. And I, being an HR practitioner, working in HR, I was always very open and sharing that information on day one with employees as they onboard. So, making sure that you connect with someone within human resources, one of those team members should be able to answer a question like this. And typically, if there's HR generalists or HR practitioners, they are the perfect individuals because they know the policy, they know the process, and they know the steps to be able to provide the reasonable accommodation from a job applicant, job interview, and as well as from an employee standpoint. They'll be able to guide you down the right path. How have you previously supported employees who required accommodations? So, this gives some leverage to the past, right? How is that employer responding to situations of accommodations? It's a great question to ask in an interview. So allow that employer to provide you the step by step processes as to how they've supported employees and what they've also put in place. There's been times where me as an HR practitioner, I've had to ensure that we had restrooms that were ADA set up. We also had to put ramps in the front entry as well as the back entry for in the event that there is an emergency evacuation. How do employees evacuate in a safe manner and to be inclusive of individuals who are in wheelchairs or needed additional support? So, human resources or your manager should be able to answer that question. Are there policies or resources in place for employees with disabilities? So, as you can see, the language doesn't specifically focus on you, but it focuses on the employer as well as what their policies and what their resources are. So these are just some great ones that I think would be helpful for you. So I don't want to read through them all, but I do want to make sure that you can see that there's some really great opportunities here to leverage these questions, especially as you're looking to employers to seek out. Stephanie, I just want to stop for just a quick second. Are there any questions in the chat that I need to be able to respond to?
Yes, there are. Do you have more screen to share, or should we drop the screen sharing?
I've got, I think, a couple more. Here's one that I think might be helpful. These are questions to focus on. Oh, let me go back one more. Questions to avoid asking. So avoid asking about company medical policies or anything unrelated to your own needs. Because again, the interview should be around the essential functions of the job, you being able to focus in on your skill sets and those types of things. It's definitely important to know what the medical benefits are of the company, but to go in and ask specifically about, leave policies and medical policies, it then starts to give us a flag of, leave of absences and not being present or available for work. So we want to avoid some of that language when you're going in and having some of those conversations with an employer. And then do not disclose your specific medical history unless you feel comfortable, because it's not required. It's not necessary for that employer to know specifics. But again, focus on the questions that I had on that previous slide. I think that would give you a little bit more of an advantage. And then this
Thank
is the
you.
last screen, Stephanie, and then we can go into that, or we could focus right into going into the questions. And I'll just leave this slide.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and um, switch my screen here. Okay, we have 20 minutes left, so that's perfect. If you all remember, we're going to save about the last 10 minutes, and we will stop the recording. So if you'd like to ask any questions or be on camera at all in the last 10 minutes, that will not be recorded. So a few questions in the chat that are really great here. Okay, so the first one here, given the current administration's anti-DEI stance, are employers emboldened to violate disability law at this time? Are you hearing of a growing number of violations?
Oh, that was a long question, Stephanie. So
And
is
so
it's in
basically,
regard to D&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, right?
yep, are employers also being less accommodating of disabilities because of the general tone and culture of what's happening at the moment?
I think that what we hear a lot more of is in regard to diversity programs, inclusion programs, not receiving funding, or not wanting to kind of think through diversity and inclusion strategies. But that does not eliminate the Americans with Disabilities Act. So the employers are still required to allow the request, and you need to make sure that you still submit your verbal or in writing accommodation. So it does not afford them an opportunity to just disregard. But the goal is to focus more heavily on your skill sets. So, again, like I mentioned throughout the workshop, focus in on the things that are more positive. We can't change what's happening right now. We can't just, state to that employer that, we need to focus on, medical this and medical that. But if it's reasonable, the employer is definitely still committed to making sure that those accommodations can be met. So
Mhm.
I would say yes, the administration right now from the U.S. based government is more focused on D&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, not being so much of the emphasis, but the law still prohibits anything to not, disqualify candidates. So I would say
Yeah.
just don't get hung up on that. If you have an accommodation, still submit it. But again, like I mentioned, please reiterate how valuable your skill sets and your experiences are so that you can still be able to be considered for the job and put your best foot
Mhm.
forward, right? I think that's the most important. And then make sure that you are leveling that playing field. Review the essential functions of the job. Make sure that that's going to be a productive work environment for you. Um, I have heard from different job seekers with disabilities that they've disclosed to me, and just to kind of, reiterate some things that I've shared with them to support their job search, is to not focus so much on your disability. I know how hard and challenging it is, because you have to have that energy, you have to have, the positivity. When you get rejections and things like that, it's hard to stay, positive sometimes, but you have to be able to put that in the past, box that up, and focus solely on how valuable you are. And there's a lot
Mhm.
of employers out there that have very much inclusive workplaces that would be able to accommodate you.
Perfect. Thanks, Lakeisha. And in answer to that question too, if you are in the US, I'm just going to share this Instagram account that I have found incredibly helpful. She's a lawyer and she does labor and employment law. And so she actually does talk about those things sometimes. Obviously, it's not officially legal advice, but they do offer free legal consultations as well, in all 50 states in the United States. She has a program. If you link to her bio, I've followed her for quite a while. She's a really potentially good, easy resource to learn a few things about if you feel like, especially if you feel like you were discriminated against in an interview. Jen, yes, I know, I love her. Okay. If it's a large company, so you mentioned disclosing your disability request, your accommodation need, and that they're supposed to keep that confidential. So let's say it's a large company, they have an HR team who first vets applications. Does the hiring manager learn about that accommodation request, or does it stay with the HR team, or does it depend on the company?
So, in my years of experience, you need to share it with the hiring manager because there will be a need for them to make an accommodation, specific to what the accommodation request is. So if it's that you need material in advance, you need to be able to have information interpreted. It really depends on the essential functions of the job. And that's the only reason that that HR professional is going to share that information with the hiring manager. And it's really to ensure that you're going to be successful as an employee. Now, past, as far as if there's additional people, in the past, when it comes to accommodations, it's only on a need to know basis. So, other members of the team, other hiring managers within that work unit or that business or company, no, it's not important. But for your manager to know what accommodations that are needed in order for you to be successful in your work. And that's for you to perform the job functions, but then also if you need work environment accommodations, the manager would need to be made aware of that.
Yep, perfect. Okay, another question. So you're interviewing again. Your chronic illness has forced a break in your employment history. What is a corporate acceptable way to quickly explain the gap in your resume when they ask you, walk me through your resume?
Okay, that's a great one. So I, there's a couple of different ways to approach that. So was your break in employment due to your disability, or was your break in work due to just a reduction in work for that job? So I'm not sure who that question came from, but I can answer both. But if it was due to work, say if you were it
Due to
was a
disability is the question is due to disability.
okay, it's due to disability. Um, so if you made the choice to stop work because of your disability, and you needed to take some time off from a health perspective to get healthy and strong and to focus on the things that were important, then you need to, it's up to you how you share that. But I think it adds value to now saying I am in a position now where I am ready to enter the workforce again, and I had to take a leave of absence from work in order to care for myself and go through whatever treatment to get yourself healthy again. So that was a decision that was necessary. And that was something that you needed to do for yourself. Don't look at it, to me, and this is my own personal experience and advice. Don't look at it as a negative. It was necessary. And so, in order for you to show up and be your very best, you needed to make sure that you care for yourself and you got the treatment. And if that's just rest or you needing to take a pause from working, that was something that you made that decision. So stick behind your decision. And my hope is that you're better now. And now you can go into that next employer and say, now that I've taken this rest period, now I'm ready to enter the workforce again so that I can be able to add value and focus on your skills and your abilities, not that you had to take the break. So that is what I empower you to do. And really, you've got to advocate for yourself. And the healthy approach to that was I was not in a capacity to give my very best during that time frame. So I took 1 year, 6 months, however you needed. And now you're ready to give 100% to the employer in this role. So it's okay for you to be transparent and share that. And that employer, if they value you and the total you for making that choice and decision, then you should be able to focus on that. And just as a side note to that, that's no different if uh, a mother chooses to stay at home with their children and take a break. That's a choice. And that's something that we should all value in society, is that people you need, we as we can't, you can't advocate for yourself. You're the best advocate. You can't expect for the employer to bless it or to, give you a thumbs up. You got to give that to yourself. And then you've got to be able to speak to that and have the confidence to speak to it and then be able to
Yeah.
move forward from that.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting just as an experience, both my own personal health experience and as coaching. And I'd love to hear your take on this, Keisha. But I feel like we have this tendency that we want to explain, right? If you said, I was diagnosed with cancer and I went through 2 years of chemo and I was unable to work, no one would judge you for that. But if you said, I was an alcoholic and I had to go to rehab, you might get a little bit of judgment for that. If you said something like, I had some severe mental health problems and I was hospitalized, then you might get some judgment for that. And I think, I know many people in this community are in the chronic illness space, and a lot of chronic illnesses are just invisible. And so when we lean into over describing why we had to leave, it's really best, I think, to leave it as simple as possible, because then you're not giving them the opportunity to allow those unconscious biases to sneak in, right? I am curious, Keisha, your take on saying something like personal health reasons versus medical reasons, if there's a difference between those.
Yeah, I definitely think that making it personal is just a personal leave to take care of some of it's private, right? You don't have to go into why and describe why. But I think that, to your point, we do. I mean, we as humans, we are going to have biases about the details. So I think it's your personal preference as to how transparent you become. And I think the other part to that is the employer that you seek out. It depends on that work culture and that work environment, what they're going to be accepting of to. So,
Absolutely.
and I say employer, but it's really that HR person and that hiring manager that makes up that employer's decision, right?
Yeah.
So I think do your research up front and then ask questions. I get on LinkedIn, and if there's a company that I am researching for a client or a candidate, I'm asking internal people, right? What's the work culture? What are they accepting to, right? So you've got to do your research and network amongst individuals within that workplace. If you know of folks there, or if you know of individuals that can gather some of that insight and intel. Gather that, because that work culture is going to speak to a lot of how they're going to accept you and treat you while you if you join with a disability or without a disability, right?
Yeah.
And so if there's a stressful work environment that you choose not to want to work and perform your best work, then choose the best employer for you that's going to be supportive of whatever might occur in life, right? We've got a lot that we juggle, and there's things on tomorrow or next week or next year that we know we have no intentions of knowing right now. But you want to choose and select the best employer that's going to be more inclusive of situations and circumstances because they happen.
Lakeesha, thank you so much for your time today. This webinar has been hosted by the Empower Network nonprofit, a community of disabled and chronically ill people navigating employment and entrepreneurship together. Membership is $10 a month, and scholarships are available by application. If you'd like to get involved, please sign up for the newsletter and/or join us as a member today.